Hello and welcome to Simply Text. Somehow, it's already the middle of February 2022, though I've got to say it sort of feels like the middle of the first week of January in some ways. Like any good reader of frequent podcast guest Mr. Tony Nitty's annual New Year's resolution columns on Forbes, I've often challenged myself to up my writing game with my goals for the year. But we'll admit, February often comes all too fast, and the tax season is upon me, and well, working on my writing craft doesn't seem to take on as a new habit or skill. But I thought I'd try to change that a little bit this year, and I'm excited to share with you on the podcast today a conversation I had with returning guest Ted Kontopoulos. Now, this conversation came out of something I would strongly encourage everyone to do, and that's whether you work in a high-rise in downtown Chicago like Ted and me, or in a small, quiet office building somewhere, or even remote from your kitchen table. And that's get outside of those that you quote-unquote have to interact with each day, and grab a coffee at a cafe or over Zoom or Teams to get to know someone new. You might just get to talking and realize that those with a legal background, like Ted, might just have the insights you're looking for as a tax accountant with the goal of becoming a better writer. So right now, let's take a right turn and get right to the conversation on what I think is an important topic for all of us: how to be right on with your writing.
You know, obviously we've had you on the podcast before, so maybe just for the sake of those that are maybe the first time, listening, like the who you are, the what you do out of the gate here.
My name is Ted Kontopoulos. I'm a senior international tax consultant too here at BKD.
Mm-hmm.
My practice is half international tax consulting work mixed in with federal and state tax consulting work. The other half is more tax controversy. So I would almost, break it down into half the work is very transactional memo writing oriented, and the other half of the work is very advocacy oriented, writing a lot of letters to departments of revenue, including the IRS.
Yeah.
And advocating for taxpayers, or being the intermediary between the government who just wants its revenue and the taxpayer who wants to keep as much money as possible to efficiently allocate it as the taxpayer wants to.
Yeah, like this has been a conversation I consider sort of a long time coming because, yeah, like you said, even going back to when you first started, I was always impressed by your writing skills, by your research skills, just by your reading, by your, just like the knowledge that you have in general. You're just a very knowledgeable guy, enjoyable conversationalist, all that. So, I guess I consider you to be a very good writer. You also obviously, I'm not even going to give you a chance to respond.
Okay,
I'm like,
okay.
you're a good writer. We're going to go with that. And, I know too, and I've had some conversations with some around that, maybe the difference in the training between becoming going to school to become an accountant versus maybe going the legal route and the law school route. But
yeah,
maybe just before we just jump in and ground it, talk a little bit about your journey with writing and how you maybe even just your approach to it, how maybe that's changed over time.
Yeah, happily, Damien. And, I should have said this in the whole intro of who you are and what you do. I am, by trade, a lawyer. I'm licensed by the state of Illinois as admitted to the state's bar. But, my journey to writing has been a long one, and to keep it at a high level. I didn't like writing when I was a kid. I liked, math and science. And I kind of looked down on writing as being a little too fluffy. All the things we had to read when I was a kid was very fiction-based, and I'm just, as a person, less interested in fiction. So I didn't really identify with, a style or a preference of what I liked to read. I liked reading about sports figures. I liked reading about facts of, laws or history, but not about fantasy. So in high school, I kind of, approached writing very from a structured policy perspective. My only real baseline of writing was debate at the time. And so my writing focused on policy, on the facts, and was rather blunt in its structure. It was just, you asked a question, here's the answer. Maybe there are a couple of reasons why the answer is right or why it's persuasive. But, looking back on it now, in high school, I didn't use the most persuasive means of trying to be persuasive, which, as we'll cover on this podcast.
Yeah.
Part of being persuasive is acknowledging and actually fluffing up your opponent's argument to make it look as good as possible, so that when you refute it, you look a lot more credible to your reader, because you're giving your opponent a fair shake. And when you respond to it with well-reasoned arguments and theories, you come across as being more on top of it than the opposing view. And again, I didn't know this in high school. This is kind of more hindsight, but as I decided back in high school, I kind of wanted to go down the law path, did the debate team in college, continued with debate. But as a political science international relations major, the structure you're working with is a little bit different. You're trying to prove something. I remember one paper was, who was the cause of World War I? You have Russia and France on one side when they formed the alliance, which then triggered Germany's actions and support the blank check that we all know right before Franz Ferdinand gets assassinated. But there's also, the other perspective that dominates, that Germany was the cause, and Germany was the one to fire the shots first and declare war first. So it wasn't really until law school that I had a real, I need structure, I need a purpose for writing. And in law school, I had two purposes: either a transaction where I'm saying this is what the law says. There are two different ways of treating this. One is more likely to be true than the other, and therefore that's the conclusion that we arrive at. Whereas the other type of writing that I learned in law school that also had a lot of structure to it was advocacy writing. Advocacy writing was much more geared towards, which law is the most favorable for you, which facts are the most favorable for you, how good are you at playing those up and playing down the facts or laws that are less favorable to you, while still addressing it fairly.
Okay.
So I gained an appreciation only by continued exposure to my career and what lawyers were telling me. You have to be good at research. You have to be good at writing. Debate helped with research, but a lot of teachers helped with writing, lots of tips.
Yeah.
And for someone who needed a reason to write, because I feel like a lot of accounts are kind of tactically similar. Like, why am I writing? What's the point if I'm not going to write a short story or be a poet in my free and spare time, if that exists? And to me, I always needed, at a micro and a macro level, how do I put all this together? What am I writing for?
Yeah.
And, once I felt that I had those tools, I started accumulating more of them because I got good at it. People told me I was good at it, and I wanted to keep getting better. And that's sort of, the attitude I've continued to adopt in some of the philosophical changes I had from high school and college to law school was being a lot more open-minded and humble about my writing abilities and being willing to listen to people that make suggestions on how to improve that writing. Not to be like them, but just to be more effective. The whole point of writing, like speaking, is communicating.
Yeah.
And if you aren't communicating effectively, then someone else, your audience, is not receiving your message and you're being ineffective.
That's right. And it's kind of hard, right? Because you get that feedback. It almost feels like it's very critical, or you're...
Oh, yeah, like personal.
Yeah, very personal. And I can remember... Well, there's two things that come to mind when you're saying that, because I can remember a lot of my early assignments and feeling very similarly. They were very creatively focused, which wasn't as... To your point, it just wasn't quite as appealing to me.
Right.
But the other part is like I can also vividly remember, and this is one that I learned probably the most from, was you getting the paper back from, I can't remember what course it was, but it wasn't college, and just remembering it being like, I mean, the thing was red, because it was just he just wrote all over the thing. But I learned so much from that process. But having that mindset, to say, oh, okay, maybe my way isn't the way, and just there are no absolutes. Maybe that's why it also seems kind of tricky too. But you mentioned some of like the structure, the different types of writing. I will go back to like my accounting classes. There wasn't a lot of conversation around the different structures and types of writing. Transactional writing, advocacy. But certainly doing that as a tax professional. Maybe you could unpack some of those a little bit. What are they? What are some of the tips along the way with those tools and structures?
Yeah, happily. So just for the sake of being clear and complete here, when I say transactional writing, I mean memo writing, writing with a specific objective in mind. So the client wants to know whether or not, in the tax world here, whether or not, let's say, income is going to be recognized now, let's say through like a flow-through treatment versus in the future through more of a deferred tax treatment. And you're given that issue. So the way that I break this all down from the transactional perspective is I look at the three main tactics of preparing to write something, then drafting something, and then reviewing that writing piece.
Okay.
And as like a rule of thumb, one or two that's usually stick out to me is that in that three-step process of prepare, draft, review, you either spend like 33% at each stage, or you do something like 20% preparation, 60% writing, 20% reviewing. But the most important takeaway is, and this could apply for all writing for that matter, I suppose, is you got to go through all three steps. You have to be intentional in how you prepare to write something. You have to be intentional about how you draft something. And you have to be intentional about how you review something. And while there's certain things that apply for all writing, if it's academic, it's transactional, or advocacy, there are some things that are unique to transactions or to advocacy writing. And so with respect to the preparation portion, of course, you have to listen no matter what, especially in the transactional setting. What does the client want? What does your partner or reviewer that's giving you the assignment want you to do? You need to listen and then research what you're told to write up a memo about.
It sounds easy in concept, but but in practice, like it's easily, because you'd say like, well, of course, like if I'm going to do what they're asking me to do, but you could easily like get down in some rabbit holes or realize maybe you didn't fully listen to your point and you're only addressing one or I mean the wrong side of something, or one angle or something. I don't know. So that's good advice. Simple but hard, perhaps.
Right, and to your point of let's take these conceptual highfalutin theories and bring them back down to earth, or anchor them down here. I like to draw. I'm a visual person, so I like to draw up and diagram the transaction that I'm working on. Who's getting what in exchange for what? I like to know exactly what's happening with the facts in the transaction, to then measure that against what the ask is from the client. Like, does the ask make sense in light of what the transaction is, or what the partner asks for? And so when you diagram the transaction, you can also create like a little T table while you're doing your research, because as you said, Damien, it's very easy to get down these rabbit holes while researching and preparing. Like, is this the right rule? Is this the right standard to this rule, which clarifies how you actually apply it to a particular set of facts? So, whatever tips you have in way of organizing all those rules and the facts you're dealing with, as a visual person, I like making and diagramming the transaction, as well as making that T table of potential different treatments for that transaction. So in the example we talked about, partner gives you, assignment, is this income immediately recognized or is it deferred? And I would draw up the T table as, immediate recognition on one side of the table and deferred on the other side of the table. Hopefully the person that gives you the assignment gives you an idea of where to look and what to look for. If not, that's on you for researching and writing up the legal rules and applicable, facts under each rule. I like to use bullet points, whatever works for you. And you can visually see, like, given the rules that apply to this particular transaction, some treat it as deferred, others treat it as flow through, and which one's more compelling given the facts that you have. And it's usually relatively clear because your facts are your biggest constraint. And so, when you walk through this preparation portion of a transactional memo, as I said, you listen first, you research second, you make this diagram third, and I would say you would outline fourth. And when you outline in a typical memo format, you got like an executive summary, then you have typically like the facts statement, the issues, a brief answer to the issues, an analysis, and a conclusion. And when I moved to the drafting phase for transactional writing, after the preparation phase tactics have been checked off, I like, as I said before, as a visual person, to physically match up by doing the analysis first. I like to sequence doing the analysis first because I know what rules apply and which facts may or may not be used. To me, drafting the analysis first is like the best filter for sorting out what facts matter and what facts don't. And I think sorting out what facts matter and what facts don't is a very easy and understandable way to go down the slippery slope, the rabbit hole of, well, like this rule could apply or this standard could apply, which would completely change the conclusion for what we're talking about in the treatment that we were asked to do a relatively simple memo for. So, on top of drafting sequentially from analysis, my own preference is analysis, facts, then the introduction and the conclusions. I also like to keep these memos in plain English. It's easy, especially in the tax world. Everything has jargon. Everything's got specific meanings, terms of art. Something for tax purposes might not mean the same thing for like book purposes or in the labor law context. So the ability to bring your language down to plain English and recognize that you're communicating something is very important and something I take very seriously in drafting.
Yeah.
Where if I write a sentence and I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, I kind of flag it for the review stage of like, how can I say this a little bit more clearly and get the idea out there?
Okay. I'm going to ask you. So, I mean, this is such a basic
Yeah,
question. But
please.
like, how do you flag it? Do you like do a comment? Do you do like, and are you
I
drafting
highlight
typically?
it.
You highlight it. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're typically doing it like in a Word document. I'm
yeah.
envisioning, and you're doing it.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Just to get like,
Of course, some
laser
details,
focus in here.
make it helpful for folks. The diagramming, by the way, folks, is on a whiteboard. If possible, get yourself a whiteboard. If you don't have that, a legal pad will suffice.
Yeah, to kind of go through. No, that's really good. And then part of that is, so would you consider maybe if there's sometimes a need to maybe develop the facts a bit more, your understanding of the facts? Is that maybe like in your listen phase? Is that sort of make sure you have the facts, but maybe to also check? Because I would imagine sometimes you're going through the process and you realize, oh wait, I don't know that, or I need to develop that more because I've come across this in my analysis and realize I have this hole in my facts. Is that
Absolutely.
How does that fit in? Yeah,
of course. And the way it fits in is just in way of the process as a whole. For all writing, I would say is that it's an iterative process. Where what I mean by iterative is you can stop at whatever point you're at in this process we've gone through: the prepare, the draft, and the review. Each one of those three stages, you could be going through the sub steps within each of those three and decide like, I need to re-review the law because this standard clearly conflicts with this other standard. I need to know which one governs for the jurisdiction that I live in. And so maybe you need to raise the fact of, well, where's this transaction taking place? And therefore, under which jurisdiction laws will govern this particular transaction and create the conclusion that you're asking me to find. And similarly for drafting, that's why I like to start with the analysis first, is because when I write the rules down, I have to match the facts that I know with bullet points to the laws that govern the outcome. When I don't have any facts to go under a bullet point, and that bullet point or that fact, that law matters a lot, as you asked, I highlighted in something obnoxious like yellow or pink or green, because it's very easy to see when you're reviewing. And flag that you need to follow up on this. And it's material to the conclusion that you reach. And in way of just making life easier for your reviewer or for your boss, which I think is always, one of the most important goals as a writer in the transactional and advocacy setting specifically, a little less in the academic setting, is to compile a list of questions to follow up with, to further refine your research, and then, change your outline maybe a little bit and change your drafting just a little bit to better match what the true facts are on the ground, and therefore what the most accurate or certain conclusion is for the transaction that you're being asked to write the memo for. So, as part of the drafting tips, on top of sequence it properly, on top of keeping everything in plain English to make it readable and clear, I would also suggest keeping sentences, especially in memos, keep sentences to 20 words or less. I know 20 words is kind of like an arbitrary number, but if you type it up in a Word document, you can see that's roughly 1.5 to 2 lines, depending on which words you're using and how big those words are. But just in way of being concise, we talked about our strategic goals are to be concise, to be clear, and to generally just be a good communication tool. And if your sentences are like 50 words or more, my goodness, how can the reader navigate that? How can the client or your boss understand exactly what you're talking about or sort through the different ideas?
Right. So I have a question there. So one around the sentence length, because I probably tend to be one that I can find myself down the road of some long sentences sometimes. So maybe some tips around making shorter sentences, but also because I think this is where it's also connected is, when you talk about making sure that it's in plain English and understandable, but then, you're also, there's this precision that you're dealing with because you're referencing the Internal Revenue Code or a case or something, and you sort of are trying to get the precise language. How do you strike that balance again while keeping it concise to not, I guess, lose some of the, water it down, or you know what I'm saying? So that you start to lose some of the effectiveness of the technical.
It really feels like a trade-off, and I think you're getting at it, Damien, of the trade-off between readability on one hand, keeping things in plain English, versus accuracy on the other hand. You want to be as precise as possible.
Right.
And I think in the memo context specifically, the way that's best balanced on a macro scale, looking at the entire memo, the sections that I described at the beginning, the executive summary, facts, etc., is typically in like one of two ways. Either the executive summary itself should be in as plain English as possible and not use any jargon whatsoever, so that, the test you can always use is, can your grandma read it? Or, as Greek person, I'd say, can my yaya read it? My yaya is 82 years old. If she can't read it and understand it, then I'm failing as a writer.
Got it.
The other way is if you're, sometimes I get asked to do really quick and dirty transactional writing. This is when I'm asked to write something up in bullet point fashion, to not put it in a hyper formal memo. And it's actually in those quick and dirty transactional writing assignments that I feel the most pressure of, how do I make this readable on one hand while also making it concise and accurate on the other. Right. And the only way, I've managed to, and I still probably struggle with this balance, honestly, and I can always improve, is by breaking it up almost as follows. What's the issue? Then you have a brief answer that's in plain English that seeks to replicate the executive summary. And then there's a reasoning portion. And the reasoning portion is where, I stick with the very short sentences, but it's a little bit more, as you said, Damien, we're in tax. Tax is filled with a lot of jargon. We're working with precision here. Words matter. And if you use the wrong words, it doesn't always lead to the same conclusion as when you use the right words. And so the reasoning portion of the quick and dirty transactional writing is where I do the more jargon-laden analysis, like using the language in the statute or the code, or as an international tax consultant, I do a lot of treaty work using the language in the treaty. But if your sentence is over, let's say 50 words, in the law world, you want to put that in block quotes, and you do so separated by space, and then you keep the margins a bit narrower, so then the reader knows this is different than the other paragraphs for a specific reason. And that might be you're citing statute, the language in the treaty, or case law, and you're citing the judge's reasoning for why your conclusion is correct, or statement of the rule is correct. If you're just applying a series of facts, let's say you're looking into this deferred versus immediate question, and the rule is that there's a 7-factor test to determine whether something is going to be deferred or immediate. And it's a balancing test, and no one factor determines the outcome if it goes one way or the other. You have to balance all 7 of them. And your analysis, you say all 7 of the factors, and then you get to the application portion of your writing. Just in general, I also remind folks, you state your issue first, you provide the rule, then you apply the rule to the facts by discussing the facts as much as you can, whichever ones are necessary, and then you reach your conclusion based off what the facts support or constrict you from. And when you're doing the fact application portion, if you have a run-on sentence, consider whether or not you're communicating more than one idea in that sentence. It doesn't hurt to just break that long sentence into a bunch of smaller sentences. And if a bunch of those smaller sentences, when you break them up, turns out that they're communicating more than one idea, then your next step is to consider whether or not to separate the paragraphs. One of my own general rules in drafting is the importance of separation. And at a micro or a small scale, separation simply means each paragraph should communicate a separate idea. Sometimes that idea takes 2 sentences. Sometimes it takes 5 or 6. But on a more macro scale, you separate your ideas by sections. If an issue, as we talked about, if it's like a 7-factor test and you got to analyze each factor could be their own section or their own paragraph.
Certainly. Yeah.
And you don't feel pressure to put it all into, especially in the transactional, like memo writing world, where you don't have to deal with page limitation requirements like you would in certain filing situations for like courts or even with certain departments of revenue.
So do you do that? Because you mentioned, I don't want to get too far ahead in the process. I want to make sure we get some of the tips as well. But the final phase being the review phase, which I imagine is probably of the phases maybe one that people perhaps sometimes shortcut or don't give enough attention to, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's easy, you feel like, hey, I've got it. Or you just time being of the essence and whatever else. So, but you talk about like some of those, breaking up the thoughts and really try to limit, how that space is used. And, is that something you're focusing on during the writing process, during the review process, a little bit of both? How does that work for you?
It's a little bit of both. And I dislike saying that because it's not very helpful for our listeners and our viewers necessarily or on its face when I provide that answer. But truthfully, I dedicate a lot more time and focus to it in the review portion. In the drafting portion, it's always kind of in the back of my mind because as someone who writes a lot, it's always all 3 steps. As I said, this is all an iterative process. Yeah. Meaning, right, whenever you go through each of the steps, you could have to jump right back to the last step or 2 steps ago and start the whole process again. And so like to that extent, it's always connected, always thinking about how to be as clear as possible, as concise as possible, and as convincing as possible.
Okay.
I don't know. My experience has been that when I've produced bad writing product, it's been because I haven't spent the time reviewing because as you said, either there's not enough time or maybe I think the issue is so simple that like, it doesn't merit review.
Sure.
But in all those circumstances, there have always been something that I could have improved in that writing.
No.
And it's not always turning in the perfect work product, but it's just your best work product.
Right.
And in the review stage, that 20% or 33%, whichever rule of thumb, sticks to you and is attractive, you really want to hunker down on being concise, being clear, and being convincing. And there are, I would suggest, separate tips for actually applying all 3 of those goals in the review process that look different than the drafting process.
Okay. Yeah, well,
So maybe I should actually mention.
Yeah, so what are these? I'm like, yeah, go on, because I feel like that's where I always, I feel like if it was one of those sections where I feel like I personally can improve it or become even just feel like I'm more efficient at or better at is that review, because sometimes I feel like I'm just having to stop myself because it's like, well, I've got to cut off here at some point, or like you said, there just doesn't seem to be the time to do it. So I could reread it a bunch of times and come up with something different and really continue to nail it down. So yeah, what are some of those tips or tools?
Yeah, so I would say in way of just achieving some degree of clarity when you're reviewing, make sure that each section communicates a separate idea or it forms a brick, so to speak, in building up the analysis or house that you're writing from either a memo or an advocacy perspective. So, do each paragraph communicate a different idea within that broader argument or within that broader discussion? For example, like, did you discuss each of the 7 factors separately in their own paragraphs? Or if they had any overlap, did you lump them together? And the plain English metric is a good way of reviewing. Is this word unnecessarily long? Are we using too many words? Word efficiency is probably the phrase that I would use here. Could you say more with less words? And in debate, that always hurt because, give like an 8-minute speech and then someone can sum up your arguments in 4 minutes. And you're like, well, I could have had another 4 minutes to make 4 more minutes of great arguments.
Yeah.
And I would say for, being convincing, my best tip, and I learned this from my law school professor who was the head clerk for the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court at the time.
Okay.
She said and suggested to me the importance of topic sentences in way of being convincing as well as being just generally clear. And my tip for review here is if you can create a second Word document or, whatever the application is that you're using, create a second version of the exact same document, and then either black out or delete every sentence after the topic sentence for each paragraph that you have. And what you're looking for when you eliminate everything after the topic sentence is whether or not those topic sentences navigate you as the reader from idea to idea. And if it doesn't, if there's some detour, if there's two paragraphs that really should just be one paragraph, or one paragraph that should be two paragraphs or three, it'll be very clear to you.
Stand out, yeah.
Like
That's a good
this
idea.
part is just blatantly missing. And,
Yeah.
and it's a good device that is, as you asked earlier, Damien, you shouldn't do that while you're drafting. Like
Right.
you
Right.
write up something, then delete it, and then rewrite it. You want to be efficient here.
Yeah.
And sticking this tip, the topic sentence tip, firmly within the review portion of our suggestions
Yeah.
is the most time efficient. And it'll help you, it just helps me out so much in way of knowing what I'm communicating and being deliberate and intentional about how I'm sequencing what I'm communicating.
Yeah.
Because if it's not so obvious after reading the topic sentence that the conclusion must follow, and that's where your memo concludes, then you've done it wrong.
And I'm going to take, because I want to kind of go down the road of articles at some point too, or
Oh,
article
yeah.
writing, because you do a great job with articles, and I'm like, just you're very prolific, and I mean,
well.
and so maybe we'll put that on the shelf too, but just to think that, like, I guess the question I'll ask now is, how does some of this? I mean, I imagine it translates incredibly well to article writing, because I mean, it's sort of transactional in nature as well. Yeah, but okay, so clarity. So I love that topic sentence idea. Any tips or tricks for being concise?
Yes,
Is that
yes,
next
yes.
one?
The concise.
Okay.
We have clear, we have convincing, and we have being concise. And in the memo drafting, as well as advocacy drafting, and even to a certain extent in like article or scholarly drafting, it all takes different forms. But the main principle is: are you using facts or statistics or bases that are necessary, versus are you using stuff that's extra and unnecessary? The way that I break it up in the transactional space and as well as like the advocacy space is this fact necessary or a part of the legal analysis? And now I consider necessary facts to either be facts that you have to use in the legal analysis because it determines whether, in our factor example, a fact is needed to know whether or not one of the factors applies or doesn't apply. That is a fact that should be used. There are sometimes facts that I think of as contextual facts, like you can't understand that fact, which must be used, without the context for how that fact came into being. Like, if it deals with the transaction, you might have to provide the date or the parties to that transaction, even though the memo is only about one of those parties and one of those dates to that transaction. Whereas some unnecessary detail might be the taxpayer's dog, was there in the room while the transaction was happening. And, the other party was so taken aback by the beauty of the Australian Shepherd that they couldn't help but decide to include this term, which matters or doesn't matter for the factor test analysis. So in way of being concise, when you're reviewing, you're looking for whether or not, in the analysis section, whether there are any facts that have nothing to do with the analysis. And in the facts section, you're looking for anything that is either not used in the analysis or provides no context for a fact that is used in the analysis. Just in way of like drafting, not to take us back too much, but
it's iterative, so that's okay.
See, this is exactly what I was talking about,
good.
right?
Yeah.
In the drafting, phase, just universal for all writing, I suggest in way of being consistent, be thematic. And by that, I mean, be either topical or be temporal, in your writing. So either if it's temporal, obviously, visual people, imagine a timeline. Your memo, advocacy letter, article should talk about the beginning to the end and arrive at today. Topically speaking, it's much more issue focused and how many topics or subtopics attach to that issue. So in the immediate versus deferred gain memo that we've been talking about and the 7-factor test, if you're approaching and drafting from a topical perspective, you think topically speaking, each of the 7 factors, which facts that those factors apply to and are applied on need to be discussed. And you'd approach it more from the factors perspective than the time perspective of, on date 1, so and so happened, then on day 2, then day 3, and so on. Whereas in the topical drafting, you'd focus a lot more just on each discrete topic. So if the 7 factors touch on 7 different topics, then your fact section and statement would pretty much be broken up through subheaders or headers by each factor, with the name of each factor as being each of the headers, and in which context and necessary facts you decide to include for each of those. So just be thematic, be topical, or be temporal, and be consistent, because it's an effective communication device that way.
Right, because I think if you end up somehow inadvertently blending, or maybe not being intentional, you can inadvertently blend, and then that could be confusing to the reader.
Right. Are we working with a warped timeline or something?
Yeah.
Or are we confusing these very distinct issues that may have happened at distinct points in time? So pick a lane and stick in it.
Yeah. I like it. Probably going through the iterative process again here, are there common mistakes either that you've made, or that you've learned from, I guess, in the process, or that you see commonly made that maybe could be ones to help to point out to maybe avoid?
This sort of gets at, your earlier dropping of the hint of the article experience that I have. And, with a lot of those articles, as well as just everyday client work from advocacy to transactions, you pick up on things, you see mistakes. So some common mistakes that I see, we're going to follow the same format from preparation to drafting to review. I see different mistakes at different phases of those 3 steps. And so in the preparation stage, sometimes I see folks that have been given a previous memo on a similar issue, or a previous letter for the same taxpayer, but maybe on a different issue, or to a different state, or to a different taxing authority, and basically recycle the same law and more or less the same facts, except changing maybe the name of the client or the name of the opponent. And I can see the appeal from a time efficiency perspective, and perhaps from a time pressure perspective. But in terms of the goal being an effective advocate or an effective and trustworthy advisor, you're hurting yourself and cutting a corner for your client that may result in some issues. And so one mistake that I see at this preparation stage folks should avoid is, if you're handed something for use as leverage, a prior memo or a prior letter, absolutely use it. It's helpful, and it does help reduce the amount of time you spend on the project. But the way that you use it in preparing for your entirely different memo or letter should be with the mind of, first, let's make sure that the law that's provided here, that we've been told, actually still applies, and it's actually written the exact same way. One example I saw recently in reviewing an international issue was talking about foreign subsidiaries, where the previous rules before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had different ownership percentage requirements before a particular inclusion was deemed to be taxable income as part of the anti-deferral regime. Whereas after TCJA, that ownership percentage changed for certain shareholders for different inclusion types. And so this person was very clearly, trying to get something out and doing the best they could, but they were using a stale law that just wasn't written the same way, and therefore had a different outcome for the client on whether or not their subsidiary's income was included in their U.S. taxable income number, which could be, in that instance, was the difference of a few $1 million income, and therefore a few hundreds of thousands of dollars for tax liability, And, if we move along from that mistake seen at the preparation stage of overusing or under scrutinizing previous work product.
Sure. It takes you right down the wrong conclusion there, the wrong road, out of the gate. Yeah.
Where in the drafting portion, you already touched on it by sharing your experience, Damien. I often see sentences that are way too long, communicating way too many ideas. And it's not that the ideas are bad, or that even per se that the crafting of the sentence is bad. It's just that someone, didn't make the best choice in pushing it all together.
Yeah.
As if that's going to make it easier for the reader to necessarily follow.
Yep.
And so seeing some huge sentences or seeing some inconsistencies in a memo or in a piece of advocacy letter, this could be anything from italicizing something in some parts of the memo, but like underlining it in other parts of the memo, like case names, or using United States in some parts of the memo, but then using US or USA in other parts of the memo.
Yeah.
Especially when that pertains to names of entities, that can create a lot of unnecessary confusion.
Sure.
Like, what are you asking the auditor or the revenue agent? Which entity are you asking for relief for? Could be, can and has been an issue that I've seen unfortunately pop up, not only here, but across the accounting firm, industry and space.
Yeah.
And then, at the review stage, I'd say the biggest mistake typically is just that review hasn't happened.
Just
how do I know
it.
that? You can typos, topic sentences don't make sense.
Right.
Sometimes topic sentences are really just, they should be the conclusion sentence to your previous paragraph, and you should move on by making your second sentence in that paragraph your new topic sentence, because it shifts the focus and you're continuing the flow of your analysis or your advocacy or your whatever your conclusion is for the memo.
So this is a basic one too, right? Mm-hmm. Of like, I'll say sometimes I go through my review and see if you have a tip on this one, where I'll in my head, I know what I'm saying. So I read the sentence the way I think it is, but actually what the words are, it's just a common one to me, especially I've gone and edited, then I've like, if you go back and read it afterwards, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. So any tips on that one? Because that was one I fall victim to quite a bit.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I think almost included in that problem is the tip itself. And the tip is read, if you have time in the review stage, the piece, if it's a memo or letter, is not terribly long, which hopefully you achieved with your attention to being concise and clear. Read out loud. Use multiple senses. When you're reading in your head, you're using your eyes and you're processing and taking in the information, your eyes, and you're thinking in your head how you understand what's been written and what you're reading. But if you read it out loud, it almost forces you to declare what you're saying to an imaginary third person
audience
or second audience member, right? Yeah. And when you read stuff out loud, you catch so much more of clunky sentences or ideas that could be better sequenced by placing something before another to make what you're trying to get at a lot more persuasive, or to make it a lot clearer that the conclusion that you're reaching obviously follows from what the rules are that you had to research based off the scope of the issue that you listened to and heard from the client or from your partner or the publisher, if that's where you're publishing. So, in reviewing, you have your topic sentence tip, you have the reading out loud tip, as well as to keep things in as close to plain English where appropriate as possible. And, what we were talking about, the previous topic, it's a commonly seen error, or at least on my part as a reviewer. Clearly someone didn't read through
back and read it.
What they were writing, because if they did, they would see that
immediately. Yeah, it pops out. Yeah, interesting. So I do want to go back to this article topic, because again, you've done so much of it. Maybe you could speak a little bit about benefits that it's had for you, and then also like, because in this comment, I mean, we're kind of at the start of a new year. You look at resolutions people make and say, I want to write an article or get more involved in writing or something, and kind of get out there a little bit more. Yeah. But sometimes it's the how to start and even how to, what to write about, those sorts of things. So maybe you could speak a little bit about your experience in that regard and maybe give some encouragement to those that are thinking along those lines.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You can be a writer. Anyone can be a writer. It doesn't mean that you'll be the best, but once you're determined to be a writer, you place yourself on a path to then have the right mindset to constantly improve. Everyone starts from somewhere. No one starts as being the best writer in the world. No one, without practice, like a sport, shows up and is instantly phenomenal. And even if they are exceptional or worthy of being considered an exception from the norm because it's good, you can still further improve yourself.
Yeah.
Always. And, as you bring my experience, I'm not sure even if you remember this or if I told you this before, but when I was in law school, I served on law review. I was an editor, and I served specifically as what they called the note topics editor. So my job was to, among other things, help law review members, new students, second year law students, come up with a topic for what they were going to write at least a 40-page plus potential article about. And I can share, truthfully from that experience, I learned a whole lot about the variety of writing processes that people have. There's no wrong one. There's some that work better for certain personality types than others. As, someone that has a very analytical personality type myself, I mentioned previously the importance of structure. Before I could even get on the writing path, I needed to feel comfortable with the structure. The first time I felt like I had any semblance of a structure was in political science and in undergrad, because it wasn't this creative writing stuff that I was doing in high school where I was like, what do I write about? How do I write it? Like, why do I care about it? Whereas, once I had that structure, once you have an idea of, how to put your words into paper and how to present it or how to do that effectively, you go through the iterative steps and you slowly get better. And so, if you're a first-time writer, and there are plenty of you here, there's a ton of benefits to writing. There are reputational benefits. In my personal view and beliefs, I feel like each of us that have made it this far to make it into the accounting industry, to the legal industry, owe a duty to our community to contribute our thoughts on complex topics, simplify them so the community can better understand some of the issues that they face, whether it's small businesses or local individuals that are employed in certain industries, because these things matter. It determines whether or not certain food gets put on the table or if someone gets a birthday gift. And in addition to discharging what I described here probably pretty poorly as a duty to the community to serve them by providing this like thoughtware or these pieces of writing, you have your networking benefits in terms of when you produce a piece of writing, people presume rightly and wrongly that you're the expert on it, or that, you're someone who's put thought into it. Of course, you've put thought into the paper, which then has been published by someone that's not you. So obviously it's good enough for someone else to risk having good or bad writing, your writing, on their website or their magazine or book, whatever it ends up being. And I think in general, it also makes you a better professional, because what you're really doing, the whole point of writing, as we said here, is to communicate. Communication is a universal skill. When you improve yourself as a writer and you're intentional about those improvements, you also improve your communication skills, and you're more attuned or sensitive to how you phrase things, perhaps how much you say when you're communicating to a client or to a prospect or to your colleague. And I think that if you can improve your communication, that directly ties into how trustworthy you are. Are you honest? Do you communicate the whole truth, or do you only communicate what people want to hear? One tip I have for like drafting is use the active voice instead of the passive voice. Avoid to be verbs. To be verbs are only ever really useful in writing, in my opinion, in fiction and in advocacy writing. Sometimes you have to, for persuasive reasons, use the to be verbs, the passive verbs, the could've, would've, should've, be, there, is, and am, and instead just be a lot more direct. And in that way, there's less miscommunication, and there's just a lot more to digest. And, I felt that, just for context for our listeners here, I'm 28 going on 29. I had a personal goal to publish at least 10 articles by the time I was 30. I didn't publish my first article until I was 25 years old. And, it's because I have a nice brotherly competition. My younger brother's also an attorney with only 2 attorneys in the family, the first 2 in the family as well. So whenever I raise the bar, he raises it slightly above me. Like, I went to law school, then he went to Harvard Law School. I was admitted to the bar, then he got admitted as a litigator, so he's in court. And because, there's this perception in the legal industry that held by some that if you're a litigator, you're a real lawyer, but if you're not a litigator, you're not. It's driven me and motivated me to demonstrate, well, yeah, I don't litigate because I don't like playing Captain Hindsight of, well, you could have done this, you should have done that, or like, if I were you, I would have done this. Instead, I think of writing a lot as being on the forefront, the cutting edge, where there's so much uncertainty. And it's not like our voice independently makes the biggest difference, but it becomes part of a chorus. And that chorus helps the community make sense of really complicated issues, or it helps raise potential issue that your client didn't think of that might create a business opportunity, which is good for your professional career and advancing up the ladder or staying where you're at on top of the mountain if that's where you find yourself. But at the end of the day, writing just helps you be more successful in your profession and as well as in your personal life. And when you're trying to climb the mountain professionally, no one drives you up the mountain. You got to pack your own bags and carry it up yourself. And writing definitely is one of those things that should accompany you on that path.
Yeah.
Because, you're going to lead people, you got to communicate with people.
Right. Yeah. And I love that. I never thought of it that way, but that really is true. And even just like, I feel like understanding of concepts and topics, and you write an article on it or you write a memo on it, and you've now had to think about it differently and to be able to communicate it effectively. And so you understand it better,
right?
Yeah.
And that's like one of my own personal metrics as well for as a professional, whether or not I understand a concept. If I cannot write about it and explain it to someone else, then I truly don't understand the concept.
Right.
It's not someone else's problem that I'm ineffective as a communicator, because the concept's there, and there are either more or less effective ways of communicating it, accurately or inaccurately. And it's up to the communicator, you, me, to express that. And all our writing tips help. Keep things in plain English. Keep things short as much as you can. Keep things concise. When a reader's going from, paragraph to paragraph, why I harp so much on topic sentences is like the topic sentence either helps the reader maintain their momentum or it can sap the momentum. And if you got like 5 things in a topic sentence, then, the reader's like, oh, like why continue? Like this is brutal.
Right.
But if you have wicked short topic sentences that help advance the idea and the analysis and there's a flow to it, that's where you get your reader to get in more the mindset of like, I can't put this down. And, I have to see how this ends or what the ultimate conclusion is.
Yeah.
And, I've had, a lot of professional and personal situations where that's been communicated to me as a very important piece of my writing and why, it was selected for publication or for like an award, like the South China Sea article.
Yeah.
And
congratulations, by the way. That was a good honor. Yeah.
Oh, you're too kind. And you asked an important question about topic too. Like, of course, you and I have all these tips of you got the preparation phase, the drafting phase, and the review phase. But like, what if you don't even know what topic to start?
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah.
Think about what makes you passionate, or if nothing immediately comes to mind while you're listening to this, be attentive while in the office on the next few projects that you're on. Did you really like a particular issue or find, a particular area of law to be compelling or trigger a passion of yours? Or like in the background, do you generally care about things? And in what way can that be connected to tax? Tax notoriously touches on everything. Well, think about something. And tax probably has a hook in there. And you can decide to write about it in a particular way. And as long as you have some passion or interest in what you're writing about, that will provide additional motive to stick with the prospect of writing. Because writing is hard. If anyone tells you writing is easy, they're lying to you. Like every piece I've written, all 10 now, because one is coming out this month about Illinois' pass-through entity election.
Well, we didn't have to wait very long. Ted's 10th article came out just before the release of this episode, and we've included a link in the show notes available at bkd.com/simplytext. Go check it out.
Every single one of them is tough and different, but it's worth it. And you learn so much, and you learn how much you don't know.
Yeah.
And that to me is more vast than the very kind words you said at the top of this, that I have this vast knowledge. But if that's true, it's only vast in a vacuum relative to how much I don't know. It's so much more.
Sure. Well, we'll wait for the celebration and the congratulations on the 10 before 30 goal here, but that's really awesome.
Right.
So I guess what about writing have we not talked about yet that maybe you would add to the conversation at this point, if anything?
In way of like writing tips, I don't think that I have anything on top of what we've shared before that wouldn't be slightly different permutation of what we've said. But I did come up with some a helpful summary of some writing resolutions, if that's allowed.
Yeah.
I would say first 5 writing resolutions. Number 1, dedicate time to prepare, to draft, and to review your writing.
Mm-hmm.
All 3. You want to do all 3. And remember the rule of thumb. Second, to prepare, you want to research by listening to what you're told to research, or by listening to yourself on what your interest is. If you're trying to think of a topic to write an article about, outline what you'd like to write about and spatially separate your ideas from each other. Third, to draft, use your strong topic sentences, active voice, and short sentences. The 20 words or less is, my personal rule. You can amend that to however y'all would like. Fourth is to review. You want to read out loud. You want to revise things into plain English, and you want to be consistent. And the 5th and final, arguably, really important resolution is to be intellectually humble and be open to improvement.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, one of the examples that stuck out most in your mind from your writing days was turning in a piece of writing that was met with all these red lines of completely revising and changing what your original writing was. I had almost the exact same experience on numerous occasions, and the one that stuck out to me was first year of law school. That really intense writing professor who's the head clerk to the Chief Justice of the state of Illinois Supreme Court, so very intimidating person to write in front of, don't want to make a lot of mistakes. It was a 20-page appellate brief that I had to turn in. 19 pages of it were just completely read it out. And if I didn't go into that meeting in law school generally with the mentality of staying intellectually humble and wanting to constantly improve, if I were my high school self, I would have taken all that red line to mean you suck at writing, you can't do this, you should just stop and not even try to pursue your dream of becoming the first attorney in your family, or whatever it ends up being, first accountant in your family. But that's the way that I keep improving. I'm receptive to new ideas as much as I am receptive to sharing the very few ideas that guide my writing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that humble thing is, and I've always said this, and I think I got it from an early mentor too, of, the more you know about the tax law, the more humble you should be about it, because and those that know the most are the most humble, to your point. I consider you to be a terrific writer, but you hear talking about yourself about how, the processes you've gone through and the red lines you've gotten and all that, it's what keeps you climbing. That's what keeps you also from, that's when you can really get over your skis if you really, or just miss out entirely. Because if you get too confident and you get that kind of feedback, you blow it off and you don't take it seriously when that was an opportunity for you to learn something and grow.
Right. That topic sentence tip that actually happened at the meeting with the first year law professor while we were going over the 19 pages of corrections that needed to be made, as if I had any extra time to put into that.
Yeah. Wow. I guess that was a great summary. I love it because it's like the writing process, right? We've gone through, we kind of laid it all out. We had some visual going on there, and then we kind of you brought it all back down to an executive summary. It's good. Yeah. So I guess now this is the question that's coming to my mind right now. So okay, if you reach number 10 article now, what's next? What's next for Ted on the article and the writing goal list here?
Man, that's a great question. Probably I want to be ambitious. I want to beat my younger brother. I want to prove to him I'm a better lawyer than he is. I kid. We're both fine. We're both different.
Yes.
But
No, I can hear it. It sounds like a fun.
it's a brotherly rivalry.
Yeah.
You know, he's my best friend in the whole world, and all these things I say, you know, knowing that he's gonna be the best man at my wedding. But you know, I'd say the ambition is to have at least double, if not triple that, if possible, by the end of my 30s. And to me, the number of articles that I personally produce after reaching this 10 by 30 milestone that I set for myself is more of a running total of how many people can I empower with you know, all these suggestions that I have. How many people can I not like bring up, but how many people can I accompany with on their path, on the writing path, to produce articles, to get the confidence. And that's part of it too, of the motivation of, you know, of course you have to be interested in your topic and you got to be good at research and writing, but you know, you really have to be confident in yourself that what you're producing is good enough to you to then not feel any embarrassment or shame or humiliation for submitting it for publication or for, you know, review by the client or the partner. So to me, my biggest goal would be to see how many people I can help co-author pieces with.
That's awesome.
And really just continue to learn myself how to improve the writing process.
Well, Ted, I've learned a lot from this process. I'm going to try that topic sentence thing. The reading out loud, I'm definitely going to do that because I think that is where like I said, I'll sometimes, especially when you get rushed, and that's when you realize like, oh wow, I just wrote something that made absolutely no sense, but my mind read it the way I thought it was supposed to be. So very helpful to me. We'll put contact information in there in the show notes so that the audience members here can check it out and reach out. But just thank you for all that you've done and just even that vision that you have of empowering others. I know this is certainly going to help many. So,
and I apologize for not saying this earlier, but thank you again so much for having me on this podcast again, just for having me in general. You know, it's an honor to be here. I'm grateful that, you know, someone wants to talk to me. My younger brother and fiance always laugh at me that I could talk at a wall, but you know, someone who's running for mayor of nowhere, you know, it happens. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity. And as you said, my contact information is on the page. So please, you know, no question is too small, too dumb, however you perceive it, to reach out. You know, we're all on the same journey. You know, some of us more conscious and intentional about it than others. Sure. And that doesn't mean we're better. It just is what it is.
Different place in the journey. I like it. So, well, great. Well, thank you very much, Ted.
Yeah.
I hope you took a lot away from our talk with Ted today, and that you write on until your dreams come true. Please connect with us and let us know what you think of Simply Tax with an email to simplytax@bkd.com or out on social media. You'll find me on Twitter where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram at TaxDad, on YouTube by subscribing to our Simply Tax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn. Please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcasts, as they go a long way in helping others find Simply Tax. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.